People always say never trust fishing guides who offer deals too good to be true, but after what happened to me, I understand why. I'd been working at the warehouse on Thompson Street for about 6 months when my supervisor mentioned the fishing trip. It was minutes before my break, and I was stacking inventory when he walked over with this big grin. "Hey Benjamin, you still looking for somewhere to fish around here?" he asked. I'd mentioned it a few times. I was new to the area and hadn't found any good spots yet. Back home, I used to fish every weekend, but since moving to Westbrook, I'd been stuck without a boat or any local knowledge. "Yeah, definitely," I said, probably a little too eager. I'm not great at hiding when I want something. My buddy runs guided trips out of the marina. Usually charges $200 for a half day, but he's got an opening this Saturday. Said he'd do it for $50 if you're interested. $50 for a guided fishing trip? That was less than I'd spend on gas driving to the nearest public lake. I told him I'd take it. Saturday morning, I met the guide at the marina. His name was Carl, and he looked exactly like you'd expect. Weathered face, faded baseball cap, boat that had seen better days but looked seaworthy enough. We shook hands, and his grip was firm, calloused from years of handling ropes and fish. "You picked a good day for it," Carl said, loading my tackle box into his boat. "Water's been calm all week." The engine started with a reassuring rumble, and we headed out into the lake. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Carl knew exactly where to go, and I caught 3 decent bass in quick succession. He was friendly, telling stories about other clients, pointing out landmarks along the shoreline. "You're a natural," he said when I landed the 3rd fish. "Most city guys take all day to catch one." I felt myself relaxing for the first time in months. The warehouse job was stressful, and I hadn't realized how much I'd missed being on the water until that moment. Then Carl's radio crackled. He answered it, had a brief conversation I couldn't quite hear over the engine noise, and hung up. "Change of plans," he said. "Better spot about 20 minutes out. Trust me on this one." We headed deeper into the lake, farther from shore than I'd expected. The marina was barely visible behind us when Carl cut the engine. "This is it," he said. "Drop your line anywhere around here." I cast out, but something felt different. Carl wasn't preparing his own rod like before. Instead, he was watching me, and when I glanced back at him, he quickly looked away. "How long have you been guiding?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Long enough," he said. "Long enough to know when someone's asking too many questions." That stopped me cold. I hadn't been asking many questions at all. I caught another fish, but Carl didn't seem interested in celebrating this time. He just nodded and kept watching the shoreline. When I suggested we head back after another hour, he shook his head. "Fish are just starting to bite," he said. "We stay until I say we go." The way he said it made my stomach drop. This wasn't a suggestion. "I actually need to get back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've got plans tonight." Carl smiled, but it wasn't the friendly smile from earlier. "No, you don't." That's when I noticed my tackle box wasn't where I'd left it. He'd moved it to his side of the boat, along with the life jackets. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but when I casually checked it, there was no signal out here. "Relax, Benjamin," Carl said. "We're just going to fish a little longer." He knew my name from my supervisor, but the way he said it made my skin crawl, like he'd been thinking about me specifically. I want to go back now, I said more firmly this time. Carl's expression hardened. You paid for a half-day trip. You're getting a half-day trip. He started the engine, but instead of heading toward shore, we went parallel to it, staying the same distance out. I realized he was keeping us exactly far enough from shore that swimming would be dangerous, but close enough that I might consider trying. Your supervisor told me you're new around here, Carl said over the engine noise. Said you don't know many people yet. Live alone in that apartment complex on Miller Circle. I'd never told my supervisor where I lived. The boat rocked gently in the wake of a distant motorboat and I gripped the side. Carl was studying me now, not even pretending to focus on the water. Funny thing about fishing, he said. Sometimes people fall overboard. Happens more than you'd think, especially when they're not wearing life jackets. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it over the engine. The life jackets were still on his side of the boat, deliberately out of reach. That's when I saw another boat in the distance heading our way. Carl saw it too, and his jaw tightened. He quickly stepped back to his position behind the wheel. Looks like we're done for today, he muttered. As the other boat approached, I could see it was a family. Parents with 2 kids, out for their own fishing trip. My throat was dry, but I forced myself to act. Carl forced a smile and waved at them as they passed close by. The moment they were within earshot, I stood up on shaking legs and shouted, "Can you give me a ride back to the marina?" Carl's face went white, then red. The family looked confused but slowed their boat. "Is everything okay?" the father called out. "Everything's fine," Carl said quickly. "Just a miscommunication about timing." But I was already grabbing my tackle box and stepping toward the edge of the boat. "I need to get back," I told the family. "Please." Something in my voice must have convinced them, because the father nodded. "Come on over." Carl couldn't do anything with witnesses right there. I climbed into their boat, my hands shaking as I thanked them. As we headed back to the marina, I looked over my shoulder and saw Carl still sitting in his boat, watching us go. Even from that distance, I could feel his anger. The family dropped me at the marina and I practically ran to my car. I never reported it. What would I say? That a fishing guide made me uncomfortable? That he knew where I lived? But I never went fishing alone again, and I damn sure never trusted another good deal from my supervisor. I used to go fishing alone without thinking twice. That ended the afternoon I met Dave at Miller Creek. My work mentor had been pushing me to take more time off. "You're burning yourself out, Wendy," she kept saying. As an insurance adjuster, I dealt with enough stress during the week. Car accidents, property damage claims, people at their worst moments. She thought fishing might help me relax. "There's this spot about 40 minutes out," she told me while the phones were down for system maintenance. "Miller Creek, near Yorkshire. Nothing fancy, but the locals say it's good for bass." I'd been fishing since I was a kid with my dad, so I didn't need much convincing. That Saturday, I loaded my gear and drove out to the spot she'd described. It was more remote than I'd expected. Gravel parking area, narrow trail leading down to the creek through thick trees. When I got to the water, there was one guy already set up along the bank. He looked like a regular. Expensive gear, folding chair, cooler that suggested he planned to stay all day. I found a spot downstream from him, close enough to be polite, but far enough to give us both space. "Morning," I called out as I set up my rod. "Morning," he replied. Middle-aged guy with a gray beard and a baseball cap that had seen better days. "First time out here?" "Yeah, heard it was a good spot." "It is," he said. "I'm Dave." "Wendy." He asked where I was from, what kind of fishing I usually did. Normal conversation. I told him I lived about 40 minutes away, worked in insurance, usually fished closer to home. "Insurance, huh?" Dave said, looking up from his line. "That's interesting work. You handle a lot of different areas?" "Mostly auto and property," I said, focusing on casting out into a promising-looking eddy. "Property's gotta be steady work," he added. "Always something happening to people's houses." I nodded. Most people found insurance boring, but Dave seemed genuinely interested. The fishing was good. I caught 2 nice bass in the first hour, and Dave was complimentary. He even offered me a beer from his cooler, which I politely declined. I don't drink when I'm driving, especially on back roads I don't know. "You're pretty good at this," Dave said after I landed the second fish. "Your dad teach you?" "Yeah, when I was young." "He's still around?" The question caught me off guard. "He passed a few years ago." "Sorry to hear that," Dave said. "So it's just you then?" I didn't answer right away. The conversation was getting personal, but it still seemed like normal fishing small talk. About an hour later, 2 more men showed up. Dave waved at them like he knew them. "Hey Mike, Tommy," he called. "Good timing. The fish are biting." They nodded at me politely and set up their gear further downstream. I didn't think much of it. Weekend regulars who probably fished together sometimes. But as the afternoon went on, I started feeling uncomfortable. Dave kept steering the conversation back to my personal life. Where exactly did I live? Did I fish often? Was I meeting anyone later? "You live alone?" he asked casually while reeling in a small bass. That's when I realized something was wrong. I'd mentioned living 40 minutes away, but never said I was alone. "I should probably head back soon," I said, starting to reel in my line. "Already?" Dave said. "It's barely past noon. Fish are just starting to get active." "I've got plans tonight," I lied. "What kind of plans?" he pressed. I didn't owe him an explanation, but something about the intensity of his interest made me nervous. The 2 other guys, Mike and Tommy, had stopped fishing and were listening to our conversation. "Dinner with friends," I said. "Local friends?" Dave asked. That question felt loaded somehow, like he was trying to determine if people would expect to hear from me. "From work," I said, which was true enough. Dave stood up and stretched. "You know, there's a really good spot about a 1/4 mile upstream, more private. I could show you." "That's okay," I said, shouldering my gear bag. "I really do need to go." But when I started walking toward the trail, Dave stepped into my path. "Come on, Wendy," he said, and his whole demeanor had changed. The friendly fisherman act was gone. "We're just getting to know each other." That's when I realized the other 2 guys had moved. Mike was now positioned between me and the parking area, while Tommy had quietly circled around behind me. "Move," I said to Dave, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Relax," he said, but he didn't step aside. No need to be unfriendly. Mike and Tommy were closing in now, and I understood that this wasn't a coincidence. Dave had been asking all those personal questions for a reason, and his friends had positioned themselves to trap me. I didn't wait to find out what they had planned. I charged straight at Dave, driving my shoulder into his chest and clawing at his face with my free hand. He stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt, and I ran past him toward the trail. "Grab her!" Dave shouted behind me. I could hear them crashing through the brush, but I had a head start and terror was giving me speed. I reached my car and threw my gear in the back, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the gravel lot, I could see the 3 men emerging from the tree line. Dave was holding his cheek where I'd scratched him, and all 3 were staring at my license plate. I drove straight home and called the police. The officer who took my report was sympathetic but honest. It would be hard to prove anything criminal had happened. 3 men fishing in a public spot, asking questions that might have been innocent curiosity. No direct threats, no physical assault beyond my scratching Dave in self-defense. But the officer did tell me something that made my blood run cold. There'd been 2 other reports in the past year of women feeling threatened by groups of male anglers in remote fishing spots around the county. Different locations, but similar patterns. One friendly guy starting conversations, others showing up later, positioning that gradually blocked exits. I never went fishing alone after that, and I never trusted another fishing spot recommendation without checking it out thoroughly first. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fought back, if I'd been too polite or too scared to claw Dave's face and run. I don't like thinking about it, but I know this much. Dave wasn't just making conversation. He was hunting, and I was the catch he'd been waiting for. My weekend fishing routine at the old quarry never varied until the morning I found someone else's gear already set up in my spot. I'd been going to the same place every Saturday for 3 years. It was an abandoned limestone quarry about an hour outside town, turned into a deep lake when they stopped mining. Most people didn't know about it. No official access road, just a dirt track through the woods that you had to know to look for. I'd discovered it by accident and never seen another soul there in all that time. That changed directly after the announcement at work Friday that we'd be switching to 4-day weeks. I was excited about having 3-day weekends, planning to get to the quarry earlier on Saturdays. As a house cleaner, I didn't get many chances to relax, and fishing was the one thing that kept me sane. Saturday morning, I parked in my usual spot and carried my gear down the narrow path. The quarry was beautiful in the early light. Perfectly still water surrounded by limestone cliffs, so deep in the center it looked black. I always fished from the same flat rock outcropping on the east side. It had the best access to deep water and caught the morning sun. But when I rounded the last bend in the path, I stopped short. Someone was already there. A man about my age, maybe a little older, with dark hair and a neat beard. His gear was spread out exactly where I always set up. Expensive rod, tackle box, folding chair positioned just right. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. "Morning," he said pleasantly. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" "Yeah," I managed. "I've never seen anyone else here before." "Really?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "I've been coming here for years. Usually get here around dawn. Maybe we just missed each other." That didn't make sense. I always arrived before sunrise, and I'd never seen any sign that anyone else used this place. No tire tracks in the soft dirt, no trash, no worn spots in the grass where someone else might have sat, but the guy seemed friendly enough, and it wasn't like I owned the place. "I'm Walter," he said, extending his hand. "Jacob," I said, shaking it. His grip was firm, confident. "There's plenty of room," Walter said, gesturing along the shoreline. "I don't mind sharing." I didn't want to make a scene. I've never been good with confrontation, so I just nodded and found a spot about 30 feet down from him. It wasn't as good. Shallower water, more likely to snag on submerged rocks, but it would do. We fished in comfortable silence for about an hour. Walter knew what he was doing, landing 2 nice bass while I struggled with the unfamiliar casting angle from my new position. Around 8 o'clock, he packed up his rod. "Coffee break," he explained, walking back toward the parking area. I was relieved to have the spot to myself for a few minutes. The solitude was half the reason I came here. But when Walter came back 20 minutes later, he was carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want one," he said, offering me a steaming cup. It was a nice gesture, but something about it bothered me. I hadn't seen a car other than mine in the parking area when I arrived. Where had he gotten coffee from? The nearest gas station was 15 miles away. "Thanks," I said, accepting the cup but not drinking from it. "No problem," Walter said, settling back into his chair. "So you come here often?" Most weekends, I said. Same here. Funny we never ran into each other before. He cast out into the deep water. You work around here? I clean houses, I said. Weekdays mostly. That's good. Steady work, Walter said. Bet you see all kinds of interesting things in people's homes. Something in the way he said it made me glance over at him. He was watching me instead of his line, and when our eyes met, he smiled. What about you? I asked. I work from home mostly. Flexible schedule. That's how I can get out here so early. The coffee was getting cold in my hands. I set it down on the rock beside me and went back to fishing. But I was having trouble concentrating. Walter kept making small talk, asking about my route around town, whether I worked weekends, if I had family in the area. Normal conversation, but something felt off. Then he said something that made my blood freeze. You drive that blue Honda, right? The one with the dent in the rear bumper? I hadn't mentioned my car, and from where we were sitting you couldn't see the parking area. The path curved through the woods, completely blocking the view. How do you know that? I asked. Walter shrugged. Saw it when I was getting the coffee. Nice car, reliable, but that didn't explain how he knew about the dent. It was small, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I started to reel in my line. I should probably head back. Already? Walter looked at his watch. It's not even 10 yet. I've got work to catch up on, I lied. On Saturday? I didn't answer. I was focused on packing my gear as quickly as possible, but my hands were shaking. Walter was still sitting in his chair, watching me. You know, he said conversationally, I was thinking about what you said. About coming here most weekends. I realized I do know you. I stopped packing. What? I've seen you around town. You cleaned the Patterson house last month, right? On Miller Circle? The Patterson house. I had cleaned there, but how could he possibly know that? I'd worked for them exactly once, a one-time deep clean before they moved. I don't understand, I said. Walter smiled, but it was different now, colder. I know your schedule, Jacob. Tuesdays you do the Morrison place on Oak Avenue. Wednesdays it's the Williams family on Elm Drive. Thursdays you usually have 3 houses, the duplex on Park Road, then the elderly couple on Center Avenue, then that big place on 5th Drive. My tackle box slipped from my numb fingers and clattered on the rocks. He knew my entire weekly route. Clients I'd been working for months, addresses he couldn't possibly know unless he'd been following me. You've been watching me, I whispered. Watching is such an ugly word, Walter said, standing up slowly. I prefer getting to know you. I wanted to understand your routine before we met properly. I looked toward the path, calculating the distance, maybe 50 yards through the woods to reach my car. But Walter was between me and the trailhead now, and he was bigger than me, looked like he stayed in shape. This is your first time here, isn't it? I said, backing away along the shoreline. You found out I'd come here and you waited for me. Very good, Walter said. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. My phone was in my pocket, but when I pulled it out, there were no bars. I'd never needed to make a call from here before, never realized there was no cell coverage. Funny thing about this place, Walter said, walking slowly toward me. Nobody knows about it. You could scream for hours and nobody would hear you. Perfect privacy. I looked around desperately. The quarry walls were too steep to climb and the water was deep. I was a decent swimmer, but not good enough to make it to the other side, especially in my clothes and boots. My car keys, I said suddenly. They weren't in my pocket anymore. Walter held them up, jangling them slightly. Looking for these? I grabbed them when I went for coffee. Your car isn't going anywhere. That's when I realized how completely trapped I was. No phone service, no transportation, no way to climb out. and Walter had been planning this whole encounter. He knew exactly how isolated this place was because I'd led him here. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I want to know what you've seen," Walter said. "In all those houses you clean. People leave interesting things lying around when they think nobody's watching." This wasn't random. This wasn't about the fishing spot or some coincidental meeting. Walter had been following me for weeks, studying my routine, looking for the perfect opportunity to get me alone. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Sure you do. The Morrison house, for instance. They keep a lot of cash in their bedroom safe. I bet you've seen the combination." "I've never touched anything that wasn't mine," I said. "Maybe not. But you've seen things, heard things, and I think you can be very helpful to me." Walter was close enough now that I could smell his aftershave. He was holding something in his other hand. Not a weapon, but a length of rope. "Or," he continued, "if you can't be helpful, then you become a problem. And this is a very good place to solve problems permanently." That's when I noticed something that gave me the tiniest spark of hope. Walter's expensive fishing rod was still set up by the water, his tackle box open beside it. In his confidence, he'd left everything behind to corner me. I made a desperate choice. Instead of trying to run or fight, I dove sideways toward his gear. Walter lunged after me, but I was already grabbing his tackle box. It was heavy, metal with sharp corners. I swung it as hard as I could at Walter's head. He ducked, but not quite fast enough. The corner caught him above the ear, and he staggered backward. "You little," he started, but I was already running. Not toward the trail. He could catch me before I reached my car, but around the shoreline toward the far side of the quarry. It was longer, but there was an old service road on that side, overgrown but potentially passable on foot. Behind me, I could hear Walter crashing through the brush, shouting threats. My lungs burned as I ran along the narrow strip of land between the water and the cliffs, stumbling over roots and rocks. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The diesel engine was definitely getting louder now. That truck I'd heard in the distance was coming up the access road. I screamed at the top of my lungs, and Walter immediately went quiet behind me. A minute later, I saw the truck, some kind of utility vehicle with county markings. A man in work clothes got out and started walking down the path. "Help!" I shouted, stumbling toward him. "Please help me!" The county worker looked confused but concerned. "What's going on?" "There's a man. He's been following me. He took my car keys." That's when Walter appeared at the edge of the trees, but his whole demeanor had changed. The predatory confidence was gone, replaced by confused concern. "Is everything okay?" he called out. "I heard shouting." To the county worker, Walter probably looked like exactly what he'd claimed to be, just another fisherman, worried about the commotion. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the quick assessment of this new situation. "This man has been threatening me," I told the county worker. "He stole my car keys." Walter held up his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. We were just fishing, and then he started acting erratic, throwing things around. It was brilliant, actually, making me sound unstable, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But the county worker looked at both of us carefully, and I realized my tackle box attack had left its mark. Walter had a thin line of blood running down from his hairline. "Sir," the county worker said to Walter, "I'm going to need to see some identification. And if you have this gentleman's car keys, I need you to return them right now." For a moment, I thought Walter might try to bluff it out. But with a witness present, someone who could identify him later, he apparently decided it wasn't worth the risk. He pulled my keys from his pocket and tossed them on the ground between us. "Just trying to help," he said. Guy seemed confused about where he'd put them. The county worker didn't buy it, but Walter was already walking back toward his gear. He packed up quickly and left without another word, disappearing up the trail like he'd never been there. The county worker offered to follow me back to the main road to make sure I got out safely, but I could tell he thought I was probably overreacting to some minor fishing spot dispute. I didn't blame him. Walter had played his part perfectly. I never reported it to the police. What would I say? That a man knew my work schedule and had taken my keys, but given them back when asked? That he'd threatened me, but only when we were alone with no witnesses? But I did quit 2 of my regular clients, the ones Walter had mentioned specifically, and I started varying my routine, changing my schedule randomly so no one could predict where I'd be and when. I never went back to the quarry. Sometimes I drive past the access road and wonder if Walter still goes there, waiting for the next person to discover his perfect, isolated fishing spot. The thought keeps me awake sometimes. How long he'd been watching me, how much he knew about my life, how carefully he'd planned our chance meeting, and how close I came to disappearing forever in that deep, black water.